The Fujifilm X-T4 is a camera I used to have many complaints about. In the past, it's given me some problems, but after finding some workarounds, it's become my main workhorse. I use it almost every day, from making YouTube videos to photography sessions. And even in 2024, it could be a great option if you're looking to get into photography or videography. Also, FYI, this review is going to be a bit more feature heavy than usual. This is because the X-T4 is a camera I use mainly to get stuff done. Let's get started. The bads. When I first got this camera, there were two things I complained about: autofocus and IBIS. They weren't perfect. This was probably an unreasonable expectation on my part, but that's what many of us were expecting when this camera was first released. At the time, the X-T3 was a pretty popular camera, so there were high expectations for the Fujifilm X-T4. I thought it'd be the perfect YouTube camera with the great video specs, the IBIS, etc. And unfortunately, it didn't really meet those expectations, but that's okay, we'll talk about why later. Let's talk about autofocus first. The X-T4 has had autofocus issues since the beginning. Now, I should note that this is primarily for video. When it came to photography, I've never had any issues, but for video, the camera would hunt and have trouble knowing what to focus on. And yes, this was even when using linear motor focusing lenses. I've tried pretty much every setting combination possible, and I've still had a lot of the problems. So this was a big downside because video was pretty much what this camera was built for. If you just cared about photography, you could probably grab something like the X-T3 or some of the other older Fuji bodies and still be perfectly fine. But with the X-T4, I've had autofocus problems when trying to film myself, film others, and film product shots for this channel. Which is, yes, I know, pretty much everything. But the good news is that the X-T4 seems to work pretty well for talking headshots like this. So that's pretty much the only time I ever use autofocus. For everything else, I've had to try different methods to get good video. So my two workarounds for autofocus were simple: manual focus and autofocus lock. Manual focus works great for filming yourself because you don't have to worry about things like hunting or breathing. Simply set your focus setting to manual and use the lens to adjust accordingly. Autofocus lock also works very similarly. To use the AFL method, change your camera setting so that AFL is on toggle. Now when you press AFL, your focus is set until you untoggle it. From here, simply pick your focus, press AFL, and begin recording. Now your focus is set and your camera won't hunt, breathe, or change focus randomly. So these two methods have helped me a ton when trying to film myself. However, when filming others, it still can be a bit challenging because you're doing everything manually. And if you're constantly doing video work for others, I would recommend considering a different camera that has better autofocus. Now, the second problem I had with this camera was IBIS. The X-T4 has shown a few bouncy, warpy video when trying to record video handheld on focal lengths like 60mm and wider. However, it is fairly normal for IBIS to perform worse on wider lenses, and past updates from Fujifilm has made this slightly better. But the best solution I found for this was to use a lens with OIS. This can be something like the XF18-55. This has fixed some of the problems for me and has allowed me to get more stable footage handheld. I've also kind of stopped being so stubborn and started using tripods more. So that's my current setup, the X-T4 with the 18-55. And I think this is a well-balanced combo for most users. It's portable and good for most scenarios, especially if you like to shoot handheld. But at the end of the day, don't expect this camera to have the same kind of stability that GoPros and iPhones do. IBIS is meant to smoothen things out, not make your videos perfect. Maybe one day camera technology will be at the level where we can carry one of these guys and still get gimbal-like video. But until then, we gotta use what we have. The good things. Although it has some faults, the X-T4 is still a great camera. And after using it for almost 3 years now, it gets the job done. Some great qualities of the Fujifilm X-T4 are the great hybrid functions, the X-Trans4 sensor, which is my personal favorite, and the battery life. Let's break down the hybrid features first. The X-T4 is a camera that's great at both photography and video because it's basically an X-T3 with a few add-ons. The video quality is amazing, it's got DCI, 4K, 10-bit, whatever. That will take care of most of your videography needs. And I know newer cameras are starting to have things like 6K and 8K, but most of us don't need that. Especially if you're someone who's just planning to make YouTube videos, 4K is more than enough. So the three main features that make this camera a great hybrid camera is 1, the hybrid switch, 2, the fully articulating screen, and 3, the Eterna film simulation. So let's break each one of these down. One of my favorite aspects is the hybrid switch button that allows you to switch seamlessly between photo and video. This is most useful when I'm out shooting sunsets and I want to take a picture here and record video there. Other cameras like the X100V or the X Pro 3 have a drive function button, which takes a few steps to switch between photo and video. So I find those cameras more oriented towards photography. And this is a small but very useful feature of the X-T4 that I appreciate. Another great hybrid feature is the fully articulating screen. This may be a turnoff for photographers, but is actually very useful if you're trying to film yourself. I make use of this screen all the time. This is because sometimes when you're filming yourself, you just need to see yourself in frame. I used to record video with cameras that didn't have a flip out screen, and I have to check back and forth constantly to make sure I was in the shot or that I even got the shot. So if you're thinking of filming yourself, having a camera with a flip out screen just makes the process so much smoother. And I've also found the X-T4 screen very useful for getting low vertical photography shots. But besides that, a screen like the X100V or the X-T5 is probably preferred for most photographers. The final feature that makes the X-T4 a great hybrid camera is the Eterna film simulation. If you don't know what Eterna is, you can think of it like a semi-F-Log for Fujifilm cameras. It allows you to get a flatter video footage so you can color grade more easily. But it's not quite as muted as F-Log, so it still looks good unedited. And this is the film simulation I use to record most of my video in. And nowadays, most Fujifilm cameras have Eterna, which is great because if you bump the dynamic range to 400 and shoot in Eterna, you can get really nice looking video footage with or without color grading. Now that we've covered those hybrid functions of the camera, let's bring this back around. Another great quality of the X-T4 is the X-Trans4 sensor. The X-Trans4 sensor is my personal favorite of all Fujifilm cameras. However, I haven't tried the newer sensors yet, so I can't really speak on those. But the X-Trans4 sensor is the sensor that is used in the X100V and the X Pro 3 as well, meaning you'll more or less get the same images between these camera bodies, the difference being the lens you choose. It's a bit difficult for me to explain why I like the X-Trans4 sensor so much. Part of me is just nostalgia because that was really the sensor that I was using when I first started getting really into photography. And the look kind of reminds me of what I think about when I think about Fujifilm, which is kind of a digital film aesthetic look. And so without going into the science behind it, because I really know nothing about it, I like the images I get from this sensor. Moving on. The battery life in the Fujifilm X-T4 is a big win. This was one of the upgrades Fujifilm added when this camera first came out. Cameras like the X-T3, the X100V, and the X Pro 3 all use the older standard Fujifilm battery, which works perfectly fine if you're just planning on taking photos, but the bigger battery is much more useful for video. This is because video is a really big battery suck. So Fujifilm made this new battery because they knew a lot of people would probably use this camera for videography. So if you're planning to shoot a lot of video, this is another reason why the X-T4 is a great option. So who is it for, and is this camera still worth it? So personally, I'd recommend this camera for anyone who is looking to start a YouTube channel, hybrid shooters, dabblers, which is someone who's primarily into photo or video but wants the option to shoot both, and pretty much anyone who doesn't know what they want yet. The Fujifilm X-T4 is kind of like a jack of all trades, master of none. It's a systems camera, meaning it's not specialized like the X Pro 3 or X100V, which are more niche cameras. This is because the X-T4 is more about getting the job done, not feeling a certain type of way about the process of photography. So in many ways, it's perfect for someone who doesn't yet know what they want. It's a camera that will really allow you to explore aspects of photography and video without committing too hard to some unique quirk. These quirks and features might be beneficial for the niche user, but for the average user, it might be more confusing and more of a debilitation than anything. So the X-T4 is a camera that will really allow you to explore your options, try different lenses, while still getting good photo and video. It's a camera I'd recommend for someone who doesn't really care about the fancy camera stuff, and if you can live with the faults and use the workarounds I mentioned earlier, it's a great hybrid camera. Now, it's important to understand that the Fujifilm X-T4 isn't considered a holy grail camera by the Fujifilm community. It doesn't have some random cult-like following like the X Pro or the X100 series, which actually makes it a really great option, because you can get this camera for a really good price. Some of these other cameras which Fujifilm is known for are valued so highly that they've become really expensive. But ironically, because the Fujifilm X-T4 isn't regarded highly in that way, it makes it a really great value option. The body I've seen go for as low as $900 used. And this combined with the XF18 of 55 might cost you somewhere around $1,200 or $1,300 at the time of writing, which is potentially the lowest cost to entry for what you're getting out of it. So although I've given it some flack in the past, the X-T4 is what's been keeping this channel alive, so I wanted to show it some love. Overall, it is a great camera, and I'd say the X-T4 is very well worth it if you're looking to buy a camera in 2024. So that wraps it up for me. If you found this video helpful, leave a comment down below, and if you haven't gotten one yet, I'm currently giving out free 4x6 prints. You can find the link down below as well. Thanks as always for watching, guys. I'll see you in another video. Peace.